"Pretend to hug me," she whispered, unaware the stranger was a billionaire who'd change her life. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The wind cut through the evening air in downtown Chicago, sharp enough to sting the skin. Streetlights glowed amber across puddles left by a passing storm. Amid the bustle of commuters, Sophie Allen pressed her scarf tighter, her breath visible in the cold. The train station clock blinked 6:42 p.m., but she could not bring herself to move. Her phone screen flashed with missed calls. Ethan's name, the man she once thought would protect her, now the reason she was running. Behind her, heavy footsteps echoed. Her chest tightened. She turned, spotting his reflection in the glass doors. Panic took over. She scanned the platform until her gaze fell on a tall man standing alone by a vending machine. Dark coat, calm posture, face unreadable. Without thinking, she ran straight to him. "Please," she whispered, voice trembling, "pretend to hug me." For a moment, the man simply blinked, startled by the desperation in her eyes. Then, without a word, he opened his arms. Sophie collapsed into him, shaking. His coat smelled faintly of cedar and rain. To anyone passing by, they looked like lovers saying goodbye. But under her breath, she was counting 1, 2, 3, until the man behind her disappeared into the crowd. When she finally stepped back, she met his eyes for the first time. They were steady, a deep gray that seemed to see through every wall she had built. "I am sorry," she stammered. "That must have been weird." He shook his head, tone calm. "You looked like you needed saving." A soft laugh escaped her, nervous and embarrassed. "Guess I owe you one." He smiled faintly. "I will collect it someday." Then he turned and walked away before she could even ask his name. That night, Sophie returned to her tiny studio apartment on the city's south side. The heater clanked weakly. The walls smelled faintly of old paint. She placed her phone on the counter, the screen still cracked from her last fight. Her paycheck from the art gallery had bounced. The landlord's note was taped to the door, "Final warning." She sank onto the couch, clutching the same scarf that still held a trace of his cologne. The stranger's calm had been the first moment of peace she had felt in months. For a brief second, the world had felt safe again. Across town, the man from the station, Ethan Carter, stepped into the back seat of a black sedan waiting by the curb. The driver asked if he was all right. Ethan only nodded, staring out at the streaks of rain racing down the window. The memory of that girl's trembling voice lingered in his chest. "Pretend to hug me." He whispered the words again, almost to himself, a rare flicker of emotion crossing his usually composed face. For years he had lived behind contracts, lawyers, and inherited titles. No one had ever asked him for something so simple, so human. As the car pulled away, the city lights reflected in his eyes, sharp, distant, yet quietly alive. He did not know it yet, but that single moment of compassion would unravel everything he thought he knew about himself. And somewhere across the frozen skyline, Sophie fell asleep on the couch, unaware that the man she had begged to pretend was a billionaire whose life was about to collide with hers again in a way neither of them could imagine. A week later, the snow had not yet melted from the curbs of Chicago. The air carried that metallic chill that sank into the bones, the kind that made people walk faster and talk less. Inside the downtown Hilton ballroom, golden chandeliers reflected off hundreds of champagne glasses. The annual Carter Foundation Gala was the kind of event Sophie used to read about, not serve in. Tonight, she was here as part of the catering crew, wearing a crisp black uniform that smelled faintly of detergent and nerves. She balanced a tray of hors d'oeuvres, weaving through conversations about hedge funds and art auctions. Her shoes pinched, her paycheck barely covered rent, and her mother's medical bills waited at home like ghosts she could not escape. Still, she smiled politely, trying to disappear into the background. Then she froze. At the center of the room stood the man from the train station, the stranger who had once held her in silence while the world spun around them. Now, under the ballroom lights, he looked different, polished, confident, surrounded by people who hung on every word. A host announced his name over the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote sponsor, Mr. Ethan Carter, CEO of Carter Innovations." Sophie almost dropped her tray. The pieces snapped into place, his calmness, the quiet authority, the way he moved through chaos as if he owned it. He was not just anyone. He was that Ethan Carter, Their eyes met across the crowd. For a heartbeat, time folded in. Then, to her shock, he smiled and nodded slightly, as if greeting an old friend. During the intermission, she slipped outside for air, leaning against a marble pillar. Her breath came out in white clouds. She heard footsteps behind her. "You remember me," Ethan said softly. She turned. "Hard to forget someone who saves you with a hug." He chuckled quietly. "You saved yourself. I just happened to be there." Silence settled between them, warm despite the cold. Then his tone shifted, careful, deliberate. "Sophie, I need a favor. It may sound strange, but I think you are the only one I can trust to do it." She blinked, unsure whether she had heard right. "Me? Yes. I need someone to pretend to be my fiancé. Just for a week." The words hit her like wind. "You are joking." "I wish I were. My father's will demands that I announce an engagement before next Friday to secure a humanitarian merger. My board wants a polished socialite. I need someone real." Sophie let out a shaky laugh. "Real? I am a waitress who cannot pay her rent. Why me?" Ethan met her gaze steadily. "Because when you asked me to pretend, you did it without expecting anything in return. Everyone around me trades affection like currency. You did not." For a long moment, she said nothing. The snow outside the glass doors shimmered under streetlights. The idea was absurd, impossible. And yet, something about his sincerity disarmed her. "There will be rules," he continued. "We sign a contract. You will be paid fairly. There will be no real marriage, no shared room, no physical contact unless required by appearances. 1 week, that is all." Her heartbeat quickened. "And when the week ends, you go back to your life, and I face mine." She hesitated, thinking of her mother's hospital bills and the eviction notice waiting on her kitchen counter. A quiet storm built inside her: fear, curiosity, and something she could not name. "You do not even know me," she said. "Maybe that is the point," he replied. "You have nothing to gain from lying to me." The sound of music swelled from inside the ballroom. She looked through the glass doors at the glow of chandeliers, the world that had never belonged to her. Then back at him, this man who looked every inch a billionaire but spoke like someone weary of pretending. Finally, she nodded once. "Fine, I will do it." He extended his hand, formal and businesslike, but his eyes softened. "Then we have an agreement. You." Her fingers trembled slightly as they shook hands. The touch was brief, professional, yet strangely familiar. The same calm she had felt that night at the station returned, wrapping around her like a promise she could not yet understand. "We will sign the contract tomorrow," Ethan said, stepping back. "My assistant will call you." Sophie swallowed hard, her breath fogging in the cold air. "Mr. Carter," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "What happens if someone finds out this is fake?" He paused at the door, glancing over his shoulder. "Then we tell them the truth," he said quietly. "That sometimes pretending is the only way to find something real." He disappeared into the ballroom's golden light, leaving Sophie alone in the marble corridor, the echo of his words lingering like a spark in the winter air. For the first time in months, she felt her heart stir not from fear, but from the faint, impossible idea that fate had not finished with her yet. The next morning, the snow outside Sophie's apartment glistened like crushed glass under the pale Sunday she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan's face, calm and unreadable, the echo of his words circling in her mind. "Pretend to be my fiancé. 1 week. No feelings, no lies, just a contract." At 9 sharp, a sleek black car pulled up outside her building. The driver stepped out, holding an envelope sealed with gold wax. Inside was the contract, 8 pages of legal precision. Sophie skimmed the clauses: payment amount, confidentiality agreement, and, in bold, the final rule: no emotional entanglement. She let out a shaky breath and signed. When she arrived at Carter Innovations Tower, the glass lobby reflected her nervous face back at her. A woman in a charcoal suit greeted her with a polite smile. "Miss Allen, Mr. Carter is expecting you." Sophie followed her through marble halls that smelled faintly of cedar and ambition. Ethan was waiting in his office, the skyline stretching behind him like a painting. He stood when she entered, offering a handshake instead of a smile. "Thank you for coming. Ready to begin?" "As ready as I can be," she replied quietly. On the desk between them lay the contract she had already signed, now countersigned by him. Beside it rested a small velvet box. Ethan opened it to reveal a sapphire ring, simple but elegant, the kind that caught light like a secret. "You will wear this in public," he said. "It belonged to my grandmother. It is valuable, so please be careful." Sophie hesitated before sliding it onto her finger. The metal was cool against her skin. "I am careful with things that are not mine," she said softly. "Good," he replied. "Then you will fit right into my world." For the next 2 days, her life transformed into a whirlwind of preparation. A stylist trimmed her hair, a designer tailored gowns, and an etiquette coach instructed her on how to speak, walk, and smile for the cameras. It felt like living inside someone else's reflection. During a rehearsal dinner at Ethan's penthouse, she stood by the massive window overlooking the frozen Chicago River. He joined her, tie undone, the city lights flickering across his expression. "You seem uncomfortable," he said. "I am just trying not to trip over my own heels," she replied, forcing a laugh. He smiled faintly. "That makes 2 of us." She glanced at him, surprised. "You? You seem like you have everything figured out." "Appearances are easy. Reality is the exhausting part." Quote. They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the city below filling the gap between them. There was something about his loneliness that mirrored her own, though neither dared to say it. Later that night, the press release went public: Ethan Carter and Sophie Allen engaged. Her name spread across news sites like wildfire. By morning, her phone was flooded with messages from people she barely knew. Some congratulated her, most doubted her. In the Carter estate, Ethan's aunt, Margaret, cornered him during breakfast. "You think this stunt will fool the board?" she hissed. "She is a waitress, Ethan. The tabloids will eat her alive." Ethan's voice remained even. "Then let them choke on it." Sophie overheard the exchange from the doorway, the words burning into her chest. When Ethan noticed her, his expression softened, but she turned away before he could speak. That afternoon, they sat together in the car on the way to a charity auction, photographers swarming outside. As the flashes exploded, Ethan leaned close, whispering just loud enough for her to hear. "Smile, Sophie, the world is watching." She took a deep breath, lifted her chin, and smiled for the cameras. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, the sapphire ring catching the light. Inside the gala, whispers followed them like perfume. One reporter called out, "Miss Allen, what does love mean to you?" Sophie froze for half a second, then answered clearly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Love is not about wealth or power. It is about choosing to stand beside someone, even when the world does not believe you belong there." The room fell silent. Ethan looked at her with something unreadable in his eyes, respect, maybe admiration, maybe something deeper he refused to name. When they returned to the car, he broke the silence. "You handled that well. I told the truth," she said simply. He nodded. "That is rarer than you think." For the first time since signing the contract, Sophie allowed herself to exhale. The rules were still in place, the lines still drawn, but somewhere between the signatures and the staged smiles, something real had begun to stir. As the car moved through the snowy streets, she glanced out the window at the city lights. In their reflection, she caught a glimpse of herself, not the waitress, not the fake fiancée, but a woman standing on the edge of something extraordinary. And beside her, Ethan Carter stared out the opposite window, pretending not to notice that his carefully built world had just shifted because of the woman who once whispered, "Pretend to hug me." By the end of the week, Sophie's life no longer felt real. Morning fittings, afternoon interviews, and endless lessons in etiquette blurred into a rhythm that belonged to someone else. She moved through grand rooms filled with glass and marble, smiling when she was told to smile, speaking when Ethan gave her the smallest nod. It was a strange partnership, part performance, part survival. But one thing had changed. The air between them had softened. The man who once spoke like a contract now laughed, quietly, when she made mistakes. That afternoon, she was sitting at a long dining table in the Carter mansion, surrounded by house staff and advisors. A silver tray of tea sat untouched as the etiquette coach lectured about posture and composure. Sophie's wrist ached from trying to balance a porcelain cup the proper way. When the woman left, Sophie groaned and slumped into her chair. Ethan walked in, holding a file of documents. "You are rebelling already?" Sophie looked up, mock serious. "I am protesting injustice. Teacups were not designed for human fingers." He chuckled, setting the file aside. "Maybe you should teach my board that kind of honesty." She smiled, noticing how his guard dropped when he laughed. "Maybe they would listen to you if you stopped talking like a press release." His eyes glimmered with amusement. "You are the only one brave enough to say that." For a moment, silence stretched, comfortable this time. Then his assistant appeared at the door. "Mr. Carter, your meeting with the legal team is ready." Ethan nodded but lingered for a second longer, his gaze resting on Sophie. "Try not to overthrow the aristocracy while I am gone." "I make no promises," she replied with a grin. When he left, she looked down at the sapphire ring on her hand. It caught the sunlight, scattering blue light across the table. For a heartbeat, it felt almost real. That evening they attended another event together, a private dinner with investors. Sophie wore a simple navy dress chosen by the stylist. Ethan escorted her through the marble corridor, whispering small instructions before they entered. "Just breathe. Remember, they are people, not gods." "I will try to remember that," she said, clutching her clutch bag a little too tightly. Inside, the room was lined with crystal and candles. Conversations shimmered with polite laughter and hidden agendas. As they took their seats, an investor's wife leaned close to Sophie, her smile sharp. "You must be thrilled. Not many girls get a fairy tale engagement out of nowhere." Sophie smiled back, her voice even. "Fairy tales usually come with curses. I am hoping to skip that part." The woman blinked, speechless, while Ethan stifled a grin. Under the table he whispered, "Remind me never to play poker with you." Later, when the dinner ended, they slipped outside to the garden terrace. Snowflakes drifted through the soft light. The city stretched far below, quiet and endless. Sophie hugged her arms. "Does it ever get easier pretending?" Ethan's voice was low. "Sometimes, until someone looks at you and sees the truth." She met his gaze. For a moment, neither spoke. The cold air pressed around them, and somewhere in that stillness, the space between pretend and real grew smaller. He broke the silence first. "You have done well. The board likes you. The press calls you mysterious but sincere." She gave a small, tired laugh. "Mysterious because I cannot afford a publicist. Sincere because I have no idea what I am doing." Ethan smiled. "That might be your greatest strength." A gust of wind brushed her hair across her face. Without thinking, he reached out and tucked the strand gently behind her ear. The touch was brief, but it sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the champagne. They both stepped back at the same time, awkward and unsure. "Good night, Sophie," he said quietly. "Good night, Mr. Carter." When he turned to leave, she watched his back disappear into the golden glow of the mansion. For a moment, she pressed a hand against her heart, the sapphire ring cold against her skin. She whispered to herself, half afraid, half amazed. It was supposed to be fake, and yet, deep down, she already knew. Something real had begun, hidden beneath the snow and secrets of a borrowed life. 2 days later, the Carter Foundation hosted its annual charity gala. It was the most important event of the year, a night where every powerful name in the city appeared under one chandelier. For Sophie, it felt like stepping into another planet made of diamonds and expectations. The news cameras lined the red carpet, reporters shouted her name, and flashbulbs painted the night sky white. Ethan offered his arm as they stepped out of the limousine. "Remember," he said quietly, "we are a team tonight." Sophie smiled nervously. "Right. A perfectly rehearsed illusion." He glanced at her, voice low. "Maybe not entirely." They entered the grand ballroom together. Music swelled from the orchestra, and hundreds of faces turned toward them. Sophie could feel the weight of every stare, every whisper that followed. "That is her. The waitress. The fake fiancé." She straightened her shoulders and smiled anyway. When they reached their table, Ethan introduced her to board members and donors. She repeated names, kept her posture perfect, and prayed her voice did not shake. But inside, her heart beat faster than the violins. Halfway through the evening, a well-known journalist approached with a microphone. "Miss Allen," he said smoothly, "you have captured the city's attention. Tell us, what exactly drew you to a man like Ethan Carter?" The question hung heavy, almost cruel. Sophie could sense the smirks from nearby tables. Ethan started to intervene, but she raised her hand slightly, meeting the reporter's gaze. "Love," she said calmly, "is not about who you are on paper. It is about who you are when no one is watching. When I met Ethan, he did not have cameras or headlines. He was just someone who made me feel safe." For a heartbeat, silence filled the hall. Then, slowly, applause began soft at first, then louder. The tension broke like glass. The reporter lowered his microphone, nodding. When the crowd turned back to their dinners, Ethan leaned close, his voice barely above a whisper. "You did not have to say that." Sophie smiled faintly. "I wanted to." Later that night, as couples waltzed under the chandeliers, Ethan offered his hand. "Dance with me?" "I am terrible at it," she said. "So am I," he replied. "We will be terrible together." Quote. They stepped onto the floor. The music slowed, a gentle rhythm filling the space. Sophie placed her hand in his. her other hand on his shoulder. For the first few seconds they stumbled, laughing quietly. Then their steps found a rhythm, soft and unspoken. "Do you know what people are saying about us?" he asked. I stopped listening. "You should not. They are calling you brave." She looked up at him, surprised. "Brave?" "Yes," he said, his tone warm. "Because you walk into rooms that try to break you and somehow leave them brighter." Her chest tightened. "You make that sound like a compliment." "It is," he said simply. As the song ended, the applause swelled again, but Sophie barely heard it. The room around them blurred into golden light. For a fleeting moment, she forgot the contract, the rules, and the watching world. It felt real, dangerously real. When the music faded, Ethan led her off the floor. His assistant whispered something in his ear and he nodded. "I have to speak with the board for a few minutes," he said softly. "Stay close. I will find you soon." Sophie nodded, but as he walked away, she caught a glimpse of a familiar figure watching her from across the room, a man in a gray suit, his eyes cold and calculating. She did not know his name yet, but that man would soon turn their fragile illusion into a storm. For now, she looked down at the sapphire ring glowing under the lights and whispered to herself, 1 week, no feelings. But her heart, stubborn and alive, had already stopped believing that lie. The night after the gala, Chicago was wrapped in quiet fog. Sophie stood on the balcony of Ethan's penthouse, the city glittering far below like 1,000 tiny promises. Her hands rested on the cold railing as she tried to slow her thoughts. The world had seen her as Ethan Carter's fiancée, yet deep down she still felt like the same woman who once borrowed a stranger's kindness on a train platform. Behind her, the glass door slid open. Ethan stepped out, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable. "You should be resting," he said softly. "It has been a long week." Sophie turned to him, smiling faintly. "I am afraid if I sleep, I will wake up and find out it was all a dream." Quote. He leaned beside her, both of them staring at the skyline. A dream can still be real while it lasts. The silence between them was not awkward anymore. It was fragile and almost comforting. Ethan's voice lowered. "You did well tonight. Better than I could have hoped." "I was terrified," she admitted. "I just kept thinking, what if I embarrass you?" "You could never embarrass me," he said, turning to look at her. "You reminded everyone in that room that truth still has a place in this city." Sophie's breath caught. "You are giving me too much credit." "I do not think so." He moved closer, and for the first time, she noticed how tired he looked. The man who commanded boardrooms now seemed human, almost breakable. "What about you?" she asked quietly. "Why do you look like you are carrying the world?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "My father built this empire on control, appearances, perfect airs. I thought I could escape it, but I have become exactly what he was, empty behind the numbers." Sophie studied him for a moment, then said gently, "Maybe you are not empty. Maybe you are just lost." He gave a small, humorless smile. "Lost, I suppose that is accurate." A gust of wind swept through, carrying the faint hum of the city below. Sophie's scarf loosened, and without thinking, Ethan reached out and fixed it. His hand lingered for a second longer than necessary. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded but did not step back. The distance between them felt thinner than air. "Sophie," he said quietly, "do you ever wonder what would happen if we stopped pretending?" Her heart skipped. "You mean, if this were real?" "Maybe it already is," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "At least it feels that way to me." The world seemed to still. For a moment there were no contracts, no headlines, no rules, just two people standing under a sky full of city lights, both unsure of how to breathe. Sophie looked away, breaking the spell. "You should not say things like that," she said softly. "Not when there is an end date." He exhaled slowly, as if the words stung. "You are right. It was never part of the deal." Quote. He turned to leave, but before he stepped inside, he said without looking back, "For what it is worth, I am glad you asked me to pretend that night." Maybe that was the first real thing that happened to either of us. When the door closed, Sophie stood alone, her heart pounding. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the weight of the sapphire ring, cool and real against her skin. The city lights blurred, as tears filled her eyes. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that lines once drawn had already been crossed. The contract had rules, but feelings never followed them. And for the first time, Sophie realized she was no longer afraid of falling. She was terrified of what would happen when the pretending finally had to end. 3 mornings later, the world that had felt magical suddenly turned cold. Sophie woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing nonstop. Her heart sank when she saw the notifications. Headlines filled the screen like falling glass shards. Ethan Carter's fiancée exposed. Waitress turned millionaire overnight. Fake engagement scandal rocks Carter innovations. Dozens of photos flooded the internet. Her, Ethan, the gala, even a snapshot of her holding the sapphire ring. Sophie's hands shook as she scrolled. Every outlet had the same cruel spin. A poor girl caught pretending to belong. She barely noticed the knock on her suite door until it opened. Ethan walked in, jaw tight, phone in hand. "I saw it," he said quietly. "It came from inside the company. Someone leaked the contract." Her throat went dry. "The contract? Ethan, it has our signatures." "I know," he said, "and that is why this is going to get ugly." She stood, trembling. "Everyone will think I used you. That I sold you out." Ethan's voice was calm but strained. "I will handle it. Stay here. Do not talk to the press." Quote. But she could already see it, the look of pity on the faces of people downstairs, the whispers in the hall. It was happening all over again, the judgment, the disbelief, the shame. When he left to meet his legal team, Sophie sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ring still glinting on her finger. The same symbol that once felt like a promise now looked like proof of her betrayal. An hour later, the news channels replayed an interview with Lucas Carter, Ethan's cousin and rival board member. Lucas spoke with a rehearsed concern that made Sophie's stomach twist. "It is unfortunate," he said to the cameras, "that my cousin allowed a woman with ulterior motives into his life and business. We are reviewing the situation carefully." Sophie clenched her fists. She knew then Lucas was the leak. By evening, the mansion felt like a cage. Reporters crowded outside the gates. Sophie slipped into the hallway, searching for air. She found Ethan in his study, standing before the fireplace, the light cutting across his tired face. "Ethan," she began, "you have to tell them the truth. Tell them I did not take your money." He looked at her for a long time, then shook his head. "If I say anything, it will sound like an excuse. The only way to stop this is to find proof of who leaked it." "And if you cannot?" she asked. His voice was low. "Then I lose everything, my company, the merger, my reputation." Tears filled her eyes. "Then you should let me go. It will be easier if I leave." Ethan stepped forward, his expression tightening. "No, this was my idea, my responsibility." "Maybe," she said, her voice breaking, "but I am the one paying for it." For a moment neither spoke. The air between them felt heavy, like it might shatter. Then she slipped the sapphire ring off her finger and placed it on his desk. "I never wanted your money," she whispered. "I only wanted to believe you were real." Ethan's eyes flickered with pain, but before he could reply, she turned and walked out. The door closed softly behind her. But to him, it sounded like the end of something he had only just begun to understand. Outside, the first snow of the new storm began to fall. Reporters shouted her name as Sophie pushed past them, her face pale but steady. She did not know where she was going, only that she had to run before her heart broke completely. Inside, Ethan stood staring at the ring, the sapphire catching the firelight. For the first time in years, he looked not like a man who had lost control of his empire, but like one who had finally realized what he could not buy back. 2 days later, the Carter boardroom was silent except for the clicking of camera shutters outside the glass walls. The company's public scandal had reached its peak. Headlines accused Ethan of fraud and manipulation, while Sophie had vanished from sight. Stockholders demanded answers. Ethan stood at the head of the long table, the city skyline burning gold behind him. Lucas Carter sat across from him, feigning concern. "You have embarrassed this family," Lucas said smoothly. "You have damaged our brand, our investors' trust. And for what? A waitress with a good story?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "You mean the story you sold to the media?" Quote. Lucas laughed softly. "That is a dangerous accusation, cousin." Ethan pressed a button on a small remote. The lights dimmed, and a large screen on the wall came alive. A video played grainy security footage from the night of the leak. It showed Lucas entering the office after hours, plugging a flash drive into Ethan's computer. Gasps filled the room. Ethan's voice was calm but cold. "I found the missing server logs. You transferred confidential documents to a tabloid email address registered under your assistant's name. The same night, our contract went public." Lucas's smile faltered. "You cannot prove that money changed hands." Ethan clicked again. Bank statements appeared on the screen, showing a payment from the magazine into an account linked to Lucas's shell company. "Proof enough," Ethan said quietly. The board erupted in murmurs. The chairman rose, his tone sharp. Lucas Carter, you are hereby suspended pending investigation. Mr. Carter, he turned to Ethan, you have our full support to restore the company's image. Lucas stood, face pale with rage. You think this saves you? The world already believes she fooled you. That is what they will remember. Ethan looked him in the eye. Then I will show them what the truth looks like. Hours later, a press conference was called in the main atrium. Reporters filled the space, cameras flashing as Ethan took the stage. His expression was steady, but there was something different in his voice, honesty stripped of pride. A week ago, he began, I asked a woman to pretend to love me for the sake of business. But what I found was not a lie. It was a reminder of what integrity and courage look like when the world stops believing in either. He paused, letting the words sink in. Sophie Allen never asked for money. She never broke our contract. The betrayal came from within my family, not from her. And if pretending saved my company once, then telling the truth will save my soul now. The crowd erupted in questions, but Ethan stepped back from the podium, his statement made. For the first time, he felt lighter, as if the mask he had worn for years had finally cracked open to let him breathe. Meanwhile, across the city, Sophie watched the broadcast from a small cafe near the river. The television flickered, showing his face, the sincerity in his voice unmistakable. When the reporter confirmed that Lucas Carter had been arrested for corporate sabotage, she covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. The cafe owner noticed her crying and turned down the volume. You know that guy? He asked gently. Sophie nodded, her voice trembling. I thought I did. She stared at the screen as Ethan ended his speech with one final line. Sometimes pretending is not a lie, it is a way of finding what is real. The room around her blurred. She felt the pull of something undeniable hope. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and slow, dusting the frozen streets. She left a few dollars on the counter and stepped out into the cold. The city lights shimmered off the river like silver threads guiding her home. At that very moment, Ethan left the building, ignoring the security team's warnings and walking straight into the crowd of flashing lights. He did not care about the cameras anymore. He only cared about finding her. The wind was sharp, the night heavy with snow, but for the first time in years, Ethan Carter walked through his city, not as a billionaire, not as a headline, but as a man ready to make something right.